So I've talked in previous vlogs about needing to upgrade my camera. I've been running the ZV-E1 for the last 2 years and it's just no longer suited for the type of content I'm shooting. I'm doing a lot of one-man band stuff because I'm just starting out and shooting a lot of interviews, so having a camera that has no internal cooling or even passive cooling is just not something that's going to work for me. So I've been needing to upgrade, but it seems like a really awkward time to be buying a new camera. You can see here I got the A7S III. Really like the build of this camera, the hybrid build, the functionality, the custom buttons and the EVF, and of course passive cooling. But this camera is way above my budget actually, and doesn't seem like the most value for money Sony camera you can actually buy in 2025. It only took my secondhand A7S III arriving with a load of firmware issues that I don't really have the energy to get into now to realise that there was definitely a better camera for me. I'll just do a quick overview. If you have an A7S III with a certain type of motherboard, which is millions of these units, there is a firmware update. Basically any of the new firmware, if you install that on your camera, it completely bricks Bluetooth functionality on your camera, which is so frustrating for me because I made a vlog a few videos ago where I talked about Sony's monitor and control app, and just generally like having buggy software for me is a bit of a deal breaker. I was upgrading because I wanted something reliable, so the A7S III got sent back, and it kind of sent me back to square one, thinking about what camera do I actually need? Do I need to splash the cash, spend £2,500 on an A7S III? Probably not. But that's the serial number there for anyone wondering. This was only on version 3. It goes all the way up to 4 and Bluetooth already lost, so watch out if you're thinking about getting an A7S III. And this actually turned into a nightmare couple of weeks. My Timber bag, the rolling one, which I made one of my first videos on, actually had issues. There was a hole in the zip at the bottom near where the wheels touch the ground. There's supposed to be a magnet that holds this in place, but it just started wearing down, and I'd only had the bag for a couple months, so I put in a warranty request, which they said they'd be able to cover as long as I organised the postage myself.
Okay, this morning I'm taking back my Timber rolling bag. It's covered by the warranty. I'm sure I talked about it in this video, but there's like some holes appearing near the zip where it drags against the ground, so I need to figure out how to protect the replacement once this one arrives, but I had to pay for packaging and postage, blah blah blah. Couldn't find a box big enough, so I've just kind of like dropped it in this big brown paper bag and added a shitload of like bubble wrap and newspaper. So I'm praying that this gets here in one piece. It would have cost me like £35 I think to send it fully insured for its value, so yeah, I'm just praying. I paid for next day, so hopefully it will show up tomorrow and I'll get my replacement next week.
This is actually a clip from the next vlog, but the camera I ended up upgrading to was a second-hand A7 IV. It's kind of an upgrade and a downgrade at the same time, so I'm going to talk about this for basically the rest of this video. It's kind of like talking through my decision making and the different options available on the market in 2025. In the next vlog, I kind of get back to regular work and talking about my experiences there, so if you want to see more kind of on-set stuff, come back for that video, which I'll post in the next few days. This is my Sony ZV-E1 and was my main camera, has been my main camera for the last 2 years. The sensor inside this camera is Sony's Exmor R CMOS sensor, which has 10.2 megabytes for video and 12.1 for still images. So this camera is the latest of Sony's lineup to feature the same sensor as most of its other flagship cameras, but this camera was released in 2023 and its main advantage over the others is being really travel friendly and lightweight. I did recently see a video of someone doing a repair of this camera and it is insane the kind of processing and kind of sensor technology that they managed to pack into this tiny little body. And if I took the cage off as well, you would see just how small this camera is. But where am I going with all of this? Well, the first camera to feature this sensor was the A7S III, which was actually going to be the camera that I upgraded to. They then released the FX3, which is a cinema camera. The only real difference between these two cameras is the build quality. So this is like a hybrid camera made for taking stills as well. And the FX3 is a cinema camera, so it's built with better fans, it has a generally more industrial type build and offers kind of like pro features like shutter angle. And then it was the FX6, which has the same sensor. Bear in mind, these cameras have the same sensor, but especially between the FX line cameras. They offer different codecs. I know the FX6 records in MXF files, so you do get a nice video quality overall, but in terms of the sensor technology and how it reacts to light, it is the same as all the other cameras. And then from there, we got the ZV-E1, which, as I mentioned, was released in 2023. So this camera was released in 2020, I believe. This one released in 2023, and it is now 2025, and Sony has not released a new flagship camera. When you ignore things like the build quality and different buttons the camera might have, obviously this camera and the FX6 are very different. Like all of the programmable buttons on the side of the FX6, internal NDs, there's so many differences. But when you look at kind of value for money and what you're getting on paper, these cameras all share the same sensor technology. So for me, this was really interesting because I did actually buy an A7S III and ended up returning that camera because it had firmware issues. But I was then back at square one in a really interesting position in 2025 because I've started doing more long form stuff, and I mentioned in a few vlogs ago that I needed something which could shoot long form content. I needed a camera that had passive cooling, which the ZV-E1 does not have. So on the used market, I could get an A7S III, I think, for £2,500, which is not cheap for a 5-year-old camera now. So the A7S III would definitely be an upgrade from this camera because it has full-size HDMI, it has an EVF. But in terms of the video quality you're getting, this camera is £1,000 more, it's 3 years older, and I just had this feeling that it's going to be outdated very soon. A lot of people in the kind of camera-centric YouTube space are saying that Sony is going to release new sensor technology either at the end of this year or the start of next year. I think people say that every year, but it has now been 5 years, and Sony, there's so much competition now. You've got the Nikon Red partnership, you've got Canon releasing small cinema builds like the FX3. Sony needs to release something soon if they're going to hold their market share. So taking a step back and thinking about that, it's likely that the price of a camera like the A7S III is just going to plummet at the start of next year. So a year after they released the A7S III, they released the Sony A7 IV. Sorry, I was meant to say 2021. Now, I don't know the facts on this, but I think this was a questionable decision for Sony to release this camera. I don't think they sold nearly as many of these as they wanted to for one reason, and that is that the A7 IV shoots 4K 60 with a crop. Now, it doesn't offer 4K 120, and I don't think everyone's interested in that, but 4K 60 with a 1.5 times crop is a massive deal to a lot of people. Of course, if they released this camera at a lower price point than the A7S III, they would just stop selling A7S IIIs. In fact, they'd probably wipe out this whole line of camera. So this camera had to be slightly below the price point of the FX3, but still offering pro features. I'm going to cut to chase now. I have decided to go for the A7 IV because I can get one of these at around the 1600 mark. Now, I got a nice discount on top of that as well, so I'm investing kind of the same, in fact less than what I paid for the ZV-E1 for a camera which might not be as feature packed, but is a much more solid choice of camera in the way that it's more reliable, it has full-size HDMI, it's able to record without overheating. So the difference between the A7 and the A7S line is the S stands for sensitive. This sensor has a base ISO of around 800, 640 in some of the cameras, and the high base ISO is where these cameras all have a massive advantage, and it's kind of what Sony has been known for, or at least was known for, having a really high second base ISO. The sensor in this camera is quite different. It is a larger 33 megapixel sensor. Now, the sensor size of this camera is the same, but because it's higher megapixel count, the 4K footage you get out of it, out of the A7 IV that is 7K downsampled to 4K, so you get a really crispy 4K. And the reason this camera doesn't shoot in 7K or whatever is because it was released in 2021, just after the A7S III. So in terms of the processor that this camera has, if it was trying to shoot like 6 or 7K internally, I think it would just be doing too much. And when you realise that that's the reason that it has a crop on 4K 60, you start to be a bit more forgiving about this camera. If this camera had to process 7K down to 4K 60 times a second, it would just overheat. It wouldn't be able to record. So for that reason, there is a crop, and the camera processor is actually able to keep up with the resolution and the data rate and everything that it has to process, if that makes sense. Another big advantage of the A7 IV is you can shoot 4K crop mode, because the full sensor size is 7K. When you then crop in to get your crop mode image, you still have a 4K resolution, which is really nice. So the maximum stills you can capture with this camera is 7,000 pixels by 4,000 pixels, or 4,500 pixels, which is a massive photo. Even a lot of professional photographers say that 33 megapixels is a good sweet spot of being really high quality and great for large prints, but not being massive file sizes like with 60 megapixel photos. The things I hate about this camera: micro HDMI, all of the kind of things which Sony skimped out on because it's a slightly lower end version of the FX3 and so on. This camera solves all of those problems, but you do miss out on slow motion. The reason I went for the A7 IV in 2025 is I can really see it holding its own as a B camera. It shoots really nice high resolution, or at least like a really crispy version of 4K, which I can see being quite future proof, and gives you all of those crop mode features, and it kind of takes the pressure off a little bit. If I know this can at some point be my stills / B camera, then I know there is a space opening up for a camera which I would be more happy to invest in when it's newer technology. But technology moves so fast. Like 2020 is not that long ago, but in terms of sensor technology and features that other manufacturers are bringing out, the A7S III is still pretty expensive for what it is in 2025. The price tag on this camera is a lot easier to stomach when you know there is something new coming right around the corner. But I need to keep working, and I need a camera that's going to work for me, and the ZVE one was not doing it. This is the cage I ended up going for my A7 IV. It's definitely a lot more expensive than some of the other options on the market, but what's unique about this cage is that it doesn't block the shutter and record button, as well as any customizable buttons on top of the camera. It's available for a load of A7 cameras, and the other thing I like is it has, I think, 3 mounting points which go through the silver neck strap loops on the A7 IV, which look like this to start with. I should probably mention that this video is not at all sponsored by SmallRig. I just like products which are, they have a good balance of being functional as well as really minimal. It just has some really nice features, like this HDMI clamp which goes on to one of the quarter 20 mounting points on the side of the cage. It also has a NATO rail built into the side of the cage and an Arca Swiss plate on the bottom of the cage, meaning I can mount any side handles or accessories to the side and my V-mount plate without needing extra NATO rails. The only NATO rail I attached was on the top of the camera. A big issue I was having is the LCD screen being limited by the big HDMI door on the A7 IV and also the HDMI clamp, but not a massive issue. You also have to take the battery door off fully when you're using a dummy battery. I know the ZVE one has a little battery door which allows you to feed the cable through. Again, not a deal breaker, just something that will be missed.
So one of the products that I always just talk about being perfect and completely changing my life, little thing that sits on top of the Sony MI shoe, but what I use this piece for, which it doesn't come with the DJI Mic 2 set, but you can buy it to go with your Sony camera. This just sits on top, which is the receiver for my little DJI transmitter mics, and I don't need to use a cable to run it into the camera. Now, it's not just about not having a cable. Anything that reads on here, so what your audio levels are on here, are what the camera's getting. So there's not this kind of worry of having to check the input levels in the camera to make sure you're not peaking and stuff like that. I have run it without this a couple times with the cable, and then I feel like I have to do a backup recording, and it's just a lot more stressful. But my new A7 IV is here. It's looking like it's going to be the perfect camera for me. Really happy with it, other than one thing, which is that the hot shoe on this camera is above
the viewfinder. I don't know why they made that decision, but it's like that. For a lot of other cameras like the FX3 as well, you'd have the same problem. So the reason this is an issue is because I have a top handle on top of the camera. So this morning I ordered this little piece, which I was hoping would shift my top handle enough to give it clearance to allow both of these pieces to sit on top of the camera. The reason I bought this second NATO rail is the 3/4 inch mount sits a little bit further forwards on the top of the cage. So the 1/4 inch NATO rail that I already had was probably about here. So it probably only moved it forward by a couple centimeters, which I thought was going to be enough, but it's not. Not that this would go anywhere, but there's no sort of locking mechanism on the DJI piece. You can see it's literally just this kind of like plastic hot shoe. So yes, it does sit in there pretty comfortably, and I don't think it would go anywhere during a shoot. It's just not quite as secure, and I wanted something which was going to allow me to lock that in place and use the MI shoe. So I found this very niche product. I think I'm like, a lot of people won't care about this enough, and they'll just say, look, I'm going to use a wire, I'm going to check my audio levels, figure out where my audio levels need to sit in the camera. But I love this so much, I'm going to try and make it work, and worst case, I can return these products. So I can reposition where my MI hot shoe is sitting to somewhere else. So for me, it would literally just be from here to here, allowing me to plug this piece in over here and still get full MI hot shoe connectivity. This is a really bad picture, but you can see it's maybe like 0.5 millimeter from where the gold pins are on the MI hot shoe to the end of the accessory. Whereas on the DJI adapter, you can see there's like 2 millimeters. You can see the difference. I'm hoping it will be enough. It's gonna be close. I'm not gonna know for sure until I order this piece, but let's try it. I wanna make this work.